The focus of this panel is off-chain compute, and more specifically, how off-chain compute is going to take our industry to the next level. So I've got a set of awesome panelists here today, I think with lots of interesting insights on this topic. So what we're going to try to do today is give you a sense of who these folks are, why what they're doing is cool, what some of the barriers are to growing a project in the off-chain compute space, what some of the possibilities are, what the potential is, and hopefully we'll have a good conversation. So I will first ask everyone, just give me like a couple minute blurb. Who are you? What are you building?
Thanks, David. Scott Dykstra, CTO and co-founder of Space and Time, a decentralized data warehouse. We built a novel ZK proof for SQL. So our data warehouse can not only hand data to smart contracts, but hand that data to smart contracts with a proof that the data itself hasn't been tampered or manipulated, and a proof that the SQL was executed correctly. What that allows is smart contracts to do things that never thought possible in Web3. They can outsource storage and SQL computation to a smart contract off-chain and ensure that the data they're getting back, to a database off-chain, and ensure the data that they're getting back from that database is accurate and verifiable. We're actually launching our beta here at Consensus. Pretty excited.
Snap.
Hello, everybody. My name is David Sneider. I'm one of the co-founders at Lit Protocol. Lit is a key management network. So the core process at the heart of this, or the core primitives used, are things like multi-party computation and threshold secret schemes. And this is sophisticated language to essentially describe a key, like a private key, a cryptographic secret, that is held or managed or in custody in a distributed context. So the one kind of really interesting primitive to keep in mind at the heart of this is something called a distributed key generation. That's what drives this whole thing. A number of parties can come together, exchange some polynomials and some randomness, and as a result, each of those parties now has something called a key share. Across that distributed key, a threshold can be set, and one can say, okay, you've done a DKG with 30 parties, it has a threshold of 2/3, so in order to use that underlying distributed key, 20 out of those 30 parties need to authorize one of those activities, whether it's signing something or decrypting something. And then what we have done as it relates to distributed compute is also add a JavaScript execution layer on top of this distributed key such that application logic can be added to this system. And so if you think about it from a Web2 analogy, what this functionally is like serverless compute plus KMS, or key management store, but built with Web3 ideals such that it's distributed and fault tolerant.
And I'm Bodkin, co-founder and CEO of ChainML. So ChainML, we are enabling generative AI in Web3. So we have both a composability layer of AI engines that make it easy to use generative AI with confidence, and then we have an infrastructure protocol beneath that lets you leverage portable, affordable compute in a decentralized cloud, an AI super cloud that is, again, enables that composability, and we allow it to be decentralized either pessimistically with BFT consensus or optimistically with fraud proofs and disputes after the fact, depending on the security requirements. So, obviously we think there is a ton of need, right? That I think the world has woken up to the urgency of integrating AI, and so we're excited to be really focusing on how do you integrate AI as a basic infrastructure capability in the Web3 stack.
So you've been building for different periods of time, but one question I have is, over the last year, and we'll start with you, Ron, what are the most interesting or exciting developments that you've seen in the specific space that you're building in?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an amazing year when you think about all that's happened. When people started seeing the potential of first generative AI in the form of stable diffusion in Midjourney, the ability to generate unbelievably high-quality images from simple text prompts. Obviously, ChatGPT exploded onto the scene and woke up the broader world to how capable these powerful general-purpose AI models are. I think what's happened next is we're seeing excitement around agents, where you have more autonomy in using AI to do a variety of tasks, and co-pilots, integrating AI capabilities in dApps and throughout applications, right? And I think that's been very exciting because it's really amplified the opportunity for Web3 to take advantage of AI as people are now seeing what can be done.
And we've integrated ChainML's technology into the UI front end for space and time so that agents can be deployed to correct SQL automatically. Like prompts to SQL against blockchain data allows a non-technical user to get blockchain data back. And ChainML acts as a conversational engine with agents to go talk to OpenAI to fix SQL when there are errors and kind of improve the conversation. So we're pretty excited about what you're building.
Awesome. I won't go with the AI take, although there's been some interesting things happening on AI as it relates to this kind of private distributed signing and encryption. Well, maybe just to touch on that slightly, it's largely
Talk about what you are interested in talking about.
Yeah, well, there's two things. It's largely been around some early teams starting to experiment just on this AI track around leveraging this distributed key provisioning side. So again, key management, there's encryption and signing are kind of the two core features of public key cryptography, and as a result, the two core features of key management network, which is what we've been building. And so on the AI side, what's been really interesting there is really early experiments with people who are running open source AI models like LLMs locally, where there's a number of different parties that are contributing to the data. And that data is like stored, encrypted on the open web, like with space and time. And then somebody who has the rights to can basically decrypt that data client side and run that model across that, run the model client side and run the decrypted data client side. And that I think it starts to become like a really interesting primitive in terms of how AI is going to be used in a way that isn't just owned by OpenAI and others like them. The other thing that's been really exciting is on the signing side, this notion of having a distributed key has really opened up the opportunity to attack one of the core problems in the Web3 space, which is user onboarding and key provisioning. So if you have your phone and you want to see a demo, you can go to getlit.dev/demo. And what you'll see there is something called Apple Passkey, which is the new login standard. The generic name is called WebAuthn. And this is like a standard from the FIDO Alliance, Fast ID Online, so Microsoft, Google, and Apple coming together and saying, this is the new model for replacing passwords. And what you'll see is a modal where your face gets scanned, and what's actually happening materially is a device key is being generated. And so being able to use that device key, which isn't a blockchain key, it can't write to Bitcoin or Ethereum, but using that as one of multiple authentication methods to authenticate transactions that end up on blockchain and on decentralized storage networks. And so things are really coming together, I think, around solving the core UX and experience problem around key provisioning to kind of the middle of the curve.
And long before I even knew about Lit, I wish I'd known about you guys a long time ago, because we had to manually solve some of these challenges ourselves at Space and Time to give, in a decentralized network, give users access to private tables. Your key can log you into Space and Time, can authenticate you, but how do you get authorized to access a certain set of private tables that belong to you? We had to essentially invent a decentralized bearer token that you get back. And if this was before I knew about Lit, and really before I knew about MPC. There's probably more effective ways now that we're going to start integrating than just having like a private key and a biscuit or a bearer token that gives you decentralized access to your assets, your tables, your schemas in space and time. Okay,
what's new in the database space? Yeah. Well, what have you seen in the last year that you're excited about?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot happening. So we're starting to see more and more use cases where enterprises want access to more blockchain data, and they want verifiable, accurate blockchain data, real-time, verifiable, cryptographically guaranteed. That's getting data from the chain and making it accessible for fast queries that power apps and big queries that power analytics for enterprises. On the other direction, we're seeing a lot of DeFi and gaming want to send data from their off-chain database over to their smart contracts to facilitate on-chain rewards, or a new DeFi protocol, a new financial instrument on-chain that requires a lot of data off-chain, like options trading on-chain, where you have to calculate the price of options off-chain. So we're seeing this two-way street where enterprises want more data from the chain, and DeFi and gaming in Web3, they want to find ways to get data from their off-chain systems to their smart contracts.
And let me ask this. So like one of my core hypotheses here is that if you're going to get transactions coming in at scale, we have to have a better IT environment. That's where it's going to start. It's going to start in the CIO's office. It's not going to start with the innovation people. What are the barriers that you're seeing to when you're thinking about how to get adoption at scale, given that you're a decentralized protocol? And why does it even matter that you're a decentralized protocol?
Yeah, I mean, I think decentralization has a number of qualities that matter, right? So people like portability, and they like not being censored, right? They like that as a long-term value proposition. That decentralization is really important for that, right? So that to me, that ends up being one of the most common things that really lands with people as an important reason to be decentralized.
Let me push you a little bit more by the extension here. Why would someone want to use you versus AWS? What's the advantage of a Web3 user? We can even start with that. Why would a Web3 user want to use you versus AWS? Ideological things aside.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, the whole AI space is one where there's a flurry of innovation, and it's incredibly risky to get locked into a single proprietary cloud. You know, I think frankly, a lot of Web3 projects discovered that lesson when they talked about decentralization, and then they built, you know, products that used 100 proprietary AWS services, and they discover they're not really censorship resistant. They're not really decentralized at all, right? Like, you can't talk decentralization and then build all with centralized services that lock you into one vendor, right? So I think, you know, this is a key value prop. You know, it's maybe more tolerable if you have a something where there's not a lot of innovation and it's sort of staying static. But the whole blockchain space is super fast innovation. Of course, the AI space is super fast innovation. You know, you want to be able to use a different model. You want to be able to compose multiple models. You want to be able to build systems that give your users the ability to steer, right? So like, it becomes incredibly important that you have that flexibility. And then, you know, underneath of it, I think the token incentives, right? We're including the ability for people to get rewarded for contributing, you know, for building useful plugins and services that fit in, right? Like, I think that ecosystem is a huge advantage. That's not really decentralization, but that's about, you know, the Web3 ethos of actually giving rewards for people for what they contribute instead of being entirely extractive, right? When you look at, you know, Web 2 marketplaces and hubs, you know, they sort of monetize all the contributions and give nothing to the creators, right? And that isn't a healthy community.
Cool.
Yeah, I think from the perspective of key management is, why is this better than the centralized version, is a super easy and super fast answer. If there's one person holding your keys, they can take your assets and see your data, and that is not true in the context of MPC and distributed keys.
Yeah, echoed, agreed. We had to figure out how to have encrypted, private, and locked down data without the node operator running the space and time node, holding secrets, holding keys. How do you do decentralized key management where the third party which holds your data doesn't hold your secrets, doesn't hold your keys? I think that's an interesting and very helpful piece of technology that Web3 brings to the enterprise data space. Put simply, for a database, why space and time versus traditional Web 2 cloud data warehouses is really just capabilities. We're not saying, hey, decentralization is necessarily the only reason why you'd pick space and time. It's just a whole new set of capabilities that aren't available today in cloud data warehousing. A single database that does both low latency transactions and analytics, a single database that has in-database encryption and open transparent data, and a single database that can read and write to the blockchain with ZK proofs. There is just no database in the cloud today that does that, decentralized or centralized.
And I think, so if I can jump in, sorry, David, I think, and then just to kind of like combine these things and move up the stack closer to the user level, like materially, I think what this ends up as in terms of why is it better, just to state the obvious, is giving people control over their data in the same way that people have control over their Bitcoin. The same being true for personal data, I think, is huge. And at the intersection of a lot of these tools, what we start to get closer to is a model that looks a lot like how login with Google works, where you log in with Google and then that application shows you a consent or selective disclosure screen. It says, this application wants access to your contacts and calendar. And when you click OK, that's a three-party relationship. Google's custodying your data and then sending it over to that application developer. And there's all kinds of rules around the work scopes there and all that kind of stuff. That being a what they call like zero-party data or first-party relationship between the user and the application just opens up an entirely new world around the way that applications can function. Like even take search, for example, something that we all like think is a primary aspect of Web 2 with Google. Okay, you put in a term and what you get back is linked data. Obviously now we have LLMs and search has started to change a little bit, but it would be really great to be able to have a search term. And in addition to getting information back from the LLM and the linked data a la Google's crawlers, also in a privacy-preserving way, perhaps having a social element that is like crawling through all of your friends' apps. And I can say, oh, distributed compute, and your face pops up and be like, oh, we should totally connect. And so this is like a totally, there's totally new opportunities to focus on the end user to build the 10x better products that get enabled through some of kind of like these sophisticated lower level capacities that we're talking about.
And I think that's why, you know, having composability in AI services is important, because the way that you can actually get better practices is you actually have a choice, right? As long as we're stuck in a world where a handful of oligopolists control the algorithms that are used, that consumers rely on, you know, it's going to be opt into our using your data or good luck to you, right? Whereas we can move to a world where, you know, King Zuck and King Elon don't dictate for us the way that information is presented, but we actually have choice among competing algorithms, then we actually have some ability to choose what's done with our data. So I think it has to go hand in hand with that composability and algorithmic choice for it to work.
So I think what's clear, as you can see, is there's lots of synergies between these three projects sitting up here. But at the same time, I think as a segment, off-chain compute projects tend to go to market singularly. It's point to point, and that's not the way that people typically consume IT services, right? They want an entire stack. So what I'm interested in is, how do you think about partnering, especially with other infrastructure projects? And obviously there's two up here that are partnering. And what do you think needs to change at the segment level in order to increase the size of the pie? Well, what type of partnership models have you considered?
Yeah, very good question. Let's talk about use cases relative to that partnership. Like, if the use case is attaching to a smart contract in some way, whether it's getting data from or reading data back to a smart contract to supplement the capabilities of the chain with some off-chain compute. Generally, there's a sort of a data pipeline. There's, you know, maybe a database that's having data streamed in from off-chain, and then there's some Oracle network that sits in between, and there's user keys that secure the data, secure the Oracle transactions, and secure the smart contract itself. I don't think any project right now wants to own all of that. That's a lot to own.
I think it's impossible to own all of that.
It's just too much to build unless you have a team of 600 engineers. Maybe that's exaggerating, but you know, I don't have a team of 600 engineers. And so like, if you focus on what you're good at, like, you have this, you know, you have machine learning services that talk to a database, that talk to an Oracle, that talk to a smart contract, and you have key management all along the way. You sort of have to have a cohesive stack if you're going to do that. And that's one use case. I just brought up the use case of sending data to a smart contract. What about providing verifiable data for the enterprise? What about allowing a video game to run a search of what in-game activity led to on-chain transactions? That's going to be there's going to be a whole data pipeline, getting data from the chain into a database, securing it, providing that analytics, and there's going to need to be partners along the way.
So let me just push on this one. So let me get more specific for you. What has worked in terms of partnering versus with other infra projects, and what has worked less well? Because it's clear that just by the three folks sitting up here, there's like a lot of stuff the three of you could do together. You need each other for.
Totally, yeah. I mean, I think, not to give a basic answer, but I think in this case, the basic answer is the right one, which is it comes back to the user. It becomes back to like, what is the story of demand? I think there's absolutely a problem in this space of like armchair philosophizing around what the ideal product is. And that's just a bunch of wasted resources and time. And so certainly that's true in like the early ideation phase around thinking about what a network is, but materially, that's something that we've really tried to focus on and I think have learned lessons around, which is some idea can sound really cool, but we don't really start devoting resources to it until we can get evidence of demand, just kind of startup 101 stuff.
I think the key need is that there are a lot of capabilities that need to come together. And so if you're doing things in a more decentralized way, you tend to have to build more specialized capabilities, right? So, in a centralized world, you can have a very small number of compute services that sort of serve a wide variety of purposes because you trust the provider and you will let whatever run, right? But the requirements for batch rendering of images versus training a machine learning model versus runtime execution of a chain of models versus doing a scientific simulation, those probably end up being different decentralized services in the Web3 world, but they still have a lot of common requirements that they need to leverage, right? And so, having sort of useful standards and integration points will be important. I mean, the trick is always like, how do you kind of converge on those standards, right? Because everyone is sort of running quickly and building what's needed to make their system work and serve users, right? But how do you start to then go and reconcile and say, how do we move from we all built something quickly that works to here are the things where there's an obvious opportunity for standard and we can get more leverage.
How much time do we have left, by the way? 10 minutes, okay, thanks. An extension of that, I think, is, all right, well, if we were to put our heads together and we know that it requires like multiple pieces of the puzzle to make something happen, like how would we get as like a, let's call it collective, because it's a small but growing middleware stack that's emerging, which I think is super cool. Like, where do you think the user demand is going to come from right now? In like, is it going to be Web3 for the foreseeable future? If we can come up with the right story collectively, can we go get Web2 IT workloads? How do you see the next, let's call it, year evolving?
Yeah, I mean, for us specifically, we're pretty focused on Web3, frankly, just because like Web2 works on JWTs and not on keys. And just from the key management perspective, our focus is like very much in Web3. So we definitely think about that question around like, how does the Web3 pie grow? Definitely more innovations around like user onboarding and the experience associated with there. I don't think we've even started to scratch the surface around what the user experience is going to look like in the next 12 to 18 months in terms of like the look and feel associated with that, in terms of delineating between per application wallets versus like your one login for the entire internet and the relationship between those two different types of wallets. So there's a whole lot to happen there. And then maybe more materially, it's like, what's the next big thing that's going to take off in following the trend of like DeFi summer and then NFTs? I don't know what the answer is. If I had to kind of speculate on that, my sense is it's probably something that is frankly going to feel like pretty unsavory and gambling-like, but also have social elements built into it. Or AI.
Yeah, I mean, I think in the AI space, there's a huge opportunity to make it compelling products that serve broader ecosystem and pull people in, right? That you can bring a lot of the benefits of Web3 under the covers, portability, affordable compute, composability, like those are things that really will resonate with anybody who's building in the space. So we think there's a huge opportunity to bring some of those capabilities and value of Web3 and bring much more workloads into the ecosystem.
Okay, so you're both focused on Web3 in the short term. What about you?
Yeah, in terms of answering the question as to a collective, I see a huge bifurcation of the business between retail Web3 and enterprise Web3 as two completely different beasts to tackle. The retail Web3 is on-chain, public chain. It's MPC for a better UX. It's I auth with my phone and my Google or my Microsoft SSO, and my phone is my 2FA to give me my private key, to unlock my private key, to buy an NFT on chain. How do you service the startups that are building in that space for the NFTs, for gaming, for DeFi, that's consumer facing and retail facing, is wildly different than the Web3 that we're seeing in the enterprise. We see this You asked me earlier what's been surprising. Well, what's been surprising is how fast enterprises are coming in to a different Web3 than we talk about at Consensus. The Web3 they're coming into is like, hey, let's take good ideas from blockchain, verifiable data, cryptographically guaranteed data. Let's take consensus technology, proof-based databases, and let's add key management, and let's call that Web3 for the enterprise. That's very different than NFT trading on-chain via MPC sign-ons.
One other point I think is interesting is that if you look at decentralized compute projects, of course trying to mimic projects that are in Web 2, but I think that a really important thing is how are these protocols designed to allow for more effective smart contract orchestration? Can you talk about the Web 3 specific nature of your protocol and how it specifically pertains to better smart contracts, smarter smart contracts? We'll start with you, Scott. Or who would you have to start with now? Yeah, I think we start with Scott.
Sure. We started first principles, just core, very challenging technology. We went and invented a novel ZK proof from the ground up, built a new cryptographic circuit, a ZK proof for SQL, something never done before. Everyone's so focused on ZK rollups to roll up an L2 to Ethereum. We said, awesome, let's go focus way over here in another part of ZK cryptography. How do we build a new circuit for SQL? Why? Because if we had a way to prove the work that the database does, prove that not only has the SQL been executed correctly, and prove that the underlying data hasn't been manipulated or tampered, then we can open up a whole new set of use cases for Web3, both in retail and in enterprise. We can connect data to verifiable systems like a smart contract and not break the trust model of Web3. Right now, so many projects are just like setting up a Postgres database next to their smart contract and put a centralized Oracle between and call it a day. And that's fine, but it kind of defeats the purpose of blockchain in the first place. So to answer your question, we went deep down to ZK, built a new ZK protocol to connect to smart contracts and started there, and then move up into enterprise use cases.
Awesome. So fun. In terms of the question, like how we oriented our product direction specifically towards Web3, this is an easy one. So again, we're in this distributed key management. There's a bunch of various kind of elliptic curves out there. Some of them are used in blockchains. Some of them are like NIST curves. And so we started, at least for the signing, with ECDSA, the curve used by Cosmos chains, EVM chains, Bitcoin, and others. And so in terms of like making and having that curve like interact with smart contracts for things beyond just transactions, I can give one onboarding example and one DeFi example. On the onboarding side, there's this really interesting team called Patch Wallets, and what they have done is created a mechanism where somebody can generate a new wallet with a lit MPC signer, whereby that wallet is a smart contract wallet, and they can do that with OAuth with one click. But then that smart contract wallet is set up in such a way that when that user wants to move to self-custody and hold their keys on their ledger and not use this distributed key management network, they can call a function within the smart contract wallet in order to remove the MPC signer and add their own new signer. Other examples that are kind of really interesting are around DeFi automation, because we've got this execution layer around the signing and the keys. There's some really interesting things happening like purely on chain with Gelato and others around like dollar cost averaging and stuff like that. But of course, everything that is executed on chain is just compute over state, or you have to bring in information via chain link in order to compute it on chain. We've seen some pretty interesting things developing, like portfolio rebalancing and other kind of DeFi automation systems.
Data-driven smart contracts.
Exactly, right? Like stop loss orders for staked tokens, whereby a signer is required to be in the loop. And the state of the art today, if you stake some tokens, for example, is you get a text message and be like, oh, I gotta go open up my computer in the middle of the night and unstake this to get out of this position, versus having a program that when triggered could like unstake your staked token, sell it for USDC on a DEX, and immediately send it off to your ledger.
That's right up Ron's alley.
Yeah, no, I was going to say, like, I think, AI lets you actually put the smart in smart contract, because, simple scripts running off chain are still not smart, although they might have access to a little more data. So you kind of have to bring it together, right? You need to use AI, you need to have access to trustworthy data, cryptographically guaranteed data like in space and time, because, we're seeing interest, from DeFi protocols managing liquidity pools to say, hey, we want to be able to to trade off risk of impermanent loss versus rewards. And that requires looking at a lot of data around what's been happening to say, what's the likely range of volatility? And then, with a forecast like that that can be computed, you could call back into the smart contract and say, hey, here's a signed result that says you've now crossed the threshold, and so now you want to rebalance. You did this off-chain compute, it was verified, it was using verified data. Right now you can have some intelligence, right? Like what we see over and over again is smart contracts are so limited, right? The amount of data they can use, the amount of compute they can afford is so limited. A lot of security vulnerabilities and attacks on DAOs have come from people saying, hey, we can't afford to do the real calculation. Here's my guess of how to approximate it. And then some clever hacker's like, oh, that's nice. I know how to attack this. I'm going to manipulate this one thing, and now I'm going to trick you into an unfavorable trade, right? Well, if you were actually adding a second layer of security with a model, or you could compute the right pricing from the get-go, it becomes powerful, right? So we're seeing, working with folks like Robodex to do, more sophisticated strategies calculated off-chain that can be integrated into smart contract is another kind of example. So lots of cases in DeFi, but ultimately, I guess I would say that you want to move away from state-of-the-art of smart contracts. The dirty secret is most of the decisions in the smart contract are coming with human-driven, week-long or slower governance processes of voting because they don't have the ability to build the intelligence into the code. And AI is going to change that.
Yeah, what the collective up here is painting a picture of is the first wave of data-driven smart contracts. Like all of Web3's TVL is locked into smart contracts that were deployed a year or two ago, like Aave, that are a very popular lending protocol where the decisions for lending are just hard-coded. Everyone gets the same rate. Aave doesn't look at your on-chain history to determine your rate, right? The next wave of smart contracts will be data-driven. It'll be supplemented by off-chain compute and powered by account abstraction so that a smart contract developer can deploy their smart contract, own it, but also outsource some of the intelligence and, of course, the compute and storage to like a space and time or ChainML.
I think that's, for me, this is the end game here. It's a more efficient transactional layer. Everybody always gets hung up on token prices. Yeah, I like making money as well. But if we want large amounts of users, large corporations coming into Web3 at scale, we have to have a better transactional layer. And that requires more advanced, more complex, more sophisticated smart contract orchestration. And that is why I love spending my time on this, because I think it's the people in the room here we're going to make that happen. So with that, we'll do our last lightning round question. When people look back on off-chain compute at Consensus 2024, in 5 words or less, what will be the theme that they think about? All right, people can have 10 seconds, and then I'm going to start. I'll start with Ron. All right, go.
It will be scaling AI execution in the Web3 ecosystem.
Boom.
That happened fast.
Yeah.
Holy shit, a whole new round of smart contracts we never anticipated.
I will say composable compute, baby.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.